Hello, everyone. Thank you. I'm Miriam Bale. I'm the artistic director of Indie Memphis. And you are joining us for a very special movie club tonight with our featured film, The Last Tree. And tonight's film is co-sponsored and was really arranged by Diara from ArtMattan. So thank you so much for allowing us to host this. And now it is my great honor to bring in the director of our featured film this week, Shola Amoo, who will be joining us
Yeah.
momentarily. Thank you. You're there. Hello.
Hey.
Thank you so much for joining us from London, where it's very late, and we appreciate you traveling, through the interwebs to join us. And
All good.
your movie is so wonderful, and it's really just such a journey. And I also have to say, it is so nice to see, to hear some of the most famous Black British actors are huge in Hollywood. We have John Boyega, so many actors, and we so rarely hear them use their real accents, their real South London accents. So
Mm.
it was such a nice experience to be able to see that. I'll start first general, and then I'll kind of get into some details. But can you talk a little bit about where this film fits in the fact that Black British actors are so popular in Hollywood, but yet we so rarely hear them with their own accents?
Sure. I think gee, good. I don't think anyone's asked me that question, so that's interesting. So that's a new one. I think it's because most of the time they're playing American characters, and that's the energy that they're inhabiting. I think the journey of a Black British film is a different journey, and I think Black British culture is still uh, a small export in onto the world stage. Even if you have Black British actors who are obviously famous in the States, it's usually they're playing American characters. So I think I think Black British lives as an export is a new, it's still emerging phenomena. I think probably the greatest Black British export is grime music, actually. So I think cinema is actually behind that.
That's a good point with music. I wanted to ask you. You have this film in particular has a real interest in landscapes and locations. We're looking at three landscapes primarily. There's Lincolnshire, and then South London. South. I
Yeah,
assume
South
where
London.
in South London is it supposed to take place?
Around Elephant Castle and Wharf Road and Old Kent Road.
Awesome. And then of course, and then sort of homecoming to Nigeria. And this is obviously an interest. Your previous film was about gentrification of neighborhoods, and you're so good at capturing. I want to ask about how, especially um, in the beginning of the film, when the main character goes from the as a young boy goes from the rural countryside of Lincolnshire to the urban landscape. How did you do that? There was just so many. There was the way that you do the camera and the sound to capture the sort of vastness of the countryside, and then the small sort of details and kind of getting lost in the details in the city, and a sort of blur. Can you talk a little bit about that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. It was it's my I can't even start the conversation without referencing my DP, my brother from another mother, Still Williams, who this is our third collaboration, and we really we knew that this story was going to be a sort of odyssey across time and landscape through the perspective of Femi. And we wanted to make it an immersive experience. We were like rejecting, I guess, in a way, objectivity for subjectivity. So we didn't want you to watch the film. We wanted you to experience the film as Femi. And so every uh, visual and sonic decision was really based around that. And in Lincolnshire, South London, and Lagos are three distinct locations. And I'm always using location as character. And I think, as a reference from my previous film, which was about gentrification in Brixton, in South London, and that became a character. So I was very much with the idea of really getting and nailing down the distinct nature of these locations and how they affect our protagonist and how he is affected by the locations. And so Lincolnshire, we knew, would be a kind of widescreen, open, fluid with camera support, quite steady environment. And that landscape would represent a lot of freedom in his childhood. And we knew once we got to the color palette was warm as well. We knew when we get to South London, we would desaturate. It would become a much more kind of handheld, rigid, restricted movement. And that would really reflect that kind of dissonance between the two spaces. And then Lagos would kind of be a coalescence of the two in a sense, because it's a kind of place where you find some sort of equilibrium in his kind of identity.
It's interesting because I feel like there aren't quite enough films for my liking of what they call third culture kids. There's the homeland and then the new land, but your film gets into almost like a fourth culture, sort of like because there's because there's the different ways of approaching the UK. There's like the urban, and then also the sort of idealized version of Britain. And I feel like I hadn't really seen that, and it's beautifully handled, and it's sort of like which culture is he promised, and which culture is for him. I want to ask you another question about the beginning. Is a really interesting choice of how you did the transition from the young Femi to the older, and I wish I had a clip of it right now, because it's really interesting effect. But rather than ask you like how you did the effect, I want to know like what was the emotional motivation of that transitional sort of effect. What were you going for with that?
It had I think again, we were trying to visually and sonically kind of capture the almost schizophrenic nature of puberty and morphing into manhood. And I think with this technique we used, in a way, it kind of solidified this transition between from him being a boy into I guess, adolescent. And it just felt right in all of the ways we were thinking about the transition. I felt like that one captured the tone and mood that felt unpredictable and yet organic at the same time.
Yeah, I'm so sorry too. You're obviously I'm making you put into words this organic visual language that you've created for this film. And I know it's a awkward translation when you've done it so beautifully in pure visuals. So thank you for humoring me with these.
It's all good. It's all good. It's a good question.
It's really remarkable though, some of your techniques and some of your, I wonder if you might talk a little bit about some of your influences, other films that, there's another scene like when he's beat up and you see him, and it reminds me of another film and I can't think of what, but you have I don't know what that effect is
It's
too,
the
but he's
body
just beat
cam.
up.
Yeah.
Oh, that's like a Spike Lee thing, right?
No, I don't know if he's used it as much. I think the film that probably used it super clearly was maybe Requiem for a Dream. Aronofsky, I think, used it really well. Um,
Oh,
but I think no, the double dolly shot where he's floating, that's probably more of a reference to Spike when he's on the way before the kiss. But when he's beat up and he's staggering and the camera's on his face, that's a body cam, and that's yeah, I think Aronofsky used it. Was one of the best uses of it in Requiem.
so he's like, the camera stays on him and it's his world that's kind of shaking around.
Yes, yes, yes.
Ah, very cool. So, do you want to indulge me in naming some of your other like references in this film?
One of the biggest ones I don't think people recognize, because I think it really was the whole essence of the movie in a sense, for me anyway, was Jack Audiard's A Preface. Because I really like Jack for the way that, and I really love that movie. It's one of my favorite. Um, I really like the way he moves seamlessly from almost like a documentary realism to a highly stylized like surrealism, and he makes it look very effortless, but it's really hard to do. So that was really my whole mantra for the film: is how to move from a kind of almost gritty social realism to stylization, almost in the same scene, without anyone really batting an eyelid. Just having enough. But I think the fact that we're in such an immersive experience, and it's not objectivity, it's subjectivity that we make king in this film. In doing that, you can do so much, and you can take an audience to so many places because they really do believe they are that character in that moment because it's so immersive. And I think my whole thing with cinema is pushing this concept of immersion over an objective, just I guess sat back viewing objectively. I think the subjective experience is so much more interesting in many ways.
Interesting.
Mm.
So there's things that do you feel like, so there are things you're kind of reacting against, like that sort of objectivity. Do you feel like it's just kind of a false objectivity, or is it just not bring you in?
I just think when we're all invested in the character's journey, and I think sometimes you know I always enjoyed the films where I felt like I was so immersed. I felt like I was on this journey with the character, and everything that was happening visually and sonically was amplifying that. And I guess I really like this concept, and I really wanted to take it to some sort of extreme, because I knew we were going across time, landscape, and we needed to be kind of locked in tight with Femi to understand the dissonance and everything that he was going through.
Awesome. I just want to just give a quick nod to our audience who's watching and just let you know I'm going to ask a few more questions because I have more questions, but then I will open it up to the audience.
I think I
And
saw one about the title already. So I'm ready for it. I got it. Without fail, it's always this. It's always there. It is indeed my favorite question.
So you can ask any question, including about the title. He said he's ready. But if you ask a question, please ask in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. Or if you like, please raise your hand and we can call on you and you can come in and join us in the conversation. If I call on you, I can either have your mic on so that you can ask a question directly, or I'll ask permission to turn your video on. It won't turn your video on unless you give permission. So if you don't feel camera ready, don't worry. But otherwise you can use the Q&A box. I want to ask you another question. So I know you've been compared to Moonlight. The film has been compared to Moonlight, but one of the things that's most interesting to me about the comparison to Moonlight is they're both period pieces, but kind of recent period pieces. And I thought that the way both are handled was so interesting. Uh, with technology and with music. But I'm so interested in some of your choices of music then. So it takes place in the early aughts, right?
Yeah, yeah, early
Like
noughties.
pre
Yeah,
iPhone, like
yeah, pre-iPhone. Yeah,
just before that, but still like cell phone and yeah, Discman. Oh right, so like late '90s, early aughts kind of.
yeah,
Okay, and then so you have so Femi is really into like alternative music, and it puts him a little bit at a distance of some of his peers. But he's listening to The Cure like in the aughts. And like how did you decide to have him listen to The Cure? And also how did you get that for for this an
yeah,
independent film?
yeah. No, we were lucky in terms of we got The Cure, we got a bit of New Order. It was really for fortunate. But and I'll say the story about how it was Robert had to enable us to had to allow us to have it. I'll get into that. But the music choices were, when I guess, the last three semi-autobiographical. So I was fostered, and I also went through a process of interviewing other British Nigerians who were fostered. And what the last three really represents is a kind of like amalgamated stories, like all of our stories coalesced into one. Um, and growing up, I remember I had the love for hip hop, but I had a real love for alternative music. And that's just music that was like coming mostly out of the 80s. And so I felt like it was very reflective of something I have a fond memory of in childhood. And so for me, it was very organic to have family listening to that music. Like listening to The Cure one moment, listening to Tupac, or some of the earliest versions of grime. I guess at that time would have been called garage also. So that's how I came across those choices. And so when we went on to confirm it was going to be Pictures of You and the other Cure track, we had to send the scene, the clip of that scene with Femi and Tope after Parents Evening, where he listens to the music, listens to her music, and the other scenes we had to send them to Robert Smith, and he had to agree. He had to agree on them for us to be able to use the music. And it turns out he liked the scenes and gave us his blessing to use the music, and so that's how we got it.
Oh my God, you're done. You don't even need to release it. Robert Smith likes your movie.
Yeah, yeah, he really. Yeah, it was really nice to have that because he could have said no very easily, and that would have been that. That would have been all she wrote.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, and then I want to ask you something. One of the most interesting themes that the Yoruba spirituality, is it Ifa?
Yeah, Ifa, yeah.
Okay, and the conflict between the Christianity and
Yeah,
the natural and the organic religion. Can you
yeah,
tell me about how you decided to bring that into this film and
yeah. Well, I'm Yoruba, and Ifa is and the Orishas are part of my heritage, and my mom passed that on to me, and so I was really engaged with what that was. And the problem is in Nigeria, I think a lot of our actual traditional religions are demonized, I guess, because of Christianity and Islam and the kind of process of colonialism where all of that sort of stuff got kind of put to the side. Ifa is still big in to some degree in the diaspora, especially in South America, where the slaves, when they were transferred there, they carried on with the traditions, even though they had to kind of hide it in South America, and so it's flourishing there. And you can talk to people in Nigeria who have an understanding of it and still practice it. But it still feels like it's being portrayed or demonized a lot of the time. So it was important for me to have a positive representation of that. And also look at the dichotomy between traditional religions against kind of, I guess, you know, Christianity and Islam in that space. And it was interesting to see it almost as a source of tension.
Also, I'm just realizing now it ends up being sort of about patriarchal religion
Yeah,
and matriarchal, because that's when he's shifting to
yeah,
understanding the
yeah,
importance of his mother.
yeah. It's very true. Yes.
That's beautiful. So this film came out in the fall, as we were saying, in the before COVID. And how has been the release? How has it been? How can you tell me a little bit about how the response has been in the UK?
Yeah, it's been so good, and I'm still having conversations with people um, who have been fostered, who I didn't know were fostered, people who I knew but didn't know they were fostered, and then people who I don't have any idea of coming forward and wanting to discuss The Last Tree, and the reception by just critics in the UK, and we won a few awards, and it just was a real blessing for a film that's you know like comes from a particular perspective, even though it's universal. You can never guarantee that people will understand and relate fully. But I felt like the things were universal enough for people to engage with The Last Tree in the way that they have, and so it's really been real joy to see that.
And I was looking up just your website, and I saw your last film played Peckhamplex, which is one of my favorite theaters in the world. Did this
Oh,
play Peckham?
you were in the you were when were you in Peckhamplex? When were you in the
I
UK?
used to live in London. I used to live in London
I
for
realized that.
like
What part?
2 years. I lived. I don't want to. Well, I will tell. Well,
Uh,
I mostly lived in Archway. And I have
like
a relative
more?
north. I have a relative who lives in Chelsea, and I had friends in Peckham, and I would go there. I would often take the bus from Chelsea all the way to
That's a
Peckham.
journey. That's a long journey.
3:45. Yeah.
That's a long journey. That's a long journey.
Yeah, but I love that theater. It's so old school and beautiful, and I hope it
Yeah,
never
it's a
changes.
really cool, and it's like really, really cheap, and so people love it. Like compared to most cinema prices,
That's
it's a
probably
beautiful.
mostly why I would go to
Yeah.
get and it's like £5.
Yeah.
It's like, but did it play there too? Has there been
It
a
did. I had a
amazing?
as a Marianne who runs it. She really loved a moving image and organized a special screening. It ran there, but she also had a great Q&A there. I remember. Yeah, I really love that cinema.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so at that, I think I'm going to open it up to audience questions. So please feel free to raise your hand. I hope you can all see the raise hand button. And if not, then I will just ask questions from the chat. You can do that. I mean, in the Q&A, not the chat. And if you're watching on YouTube, please just type in into the comments, and they'll get to us. Okay, so here's a question from Molly Wexler. I love the technique of having young Femi scream at the beginning and older Femi scream at the closing shot. If one just saw those shots without the framework of the film, it would appear as angst or anger. But in reality, it was powerful and positive and affirmative. The juxtaposition intrigued me, and I'd like to hear how you came to that idea.
Sure. It's an interesting one. I made a short called Dear Mr. Shakespeare, and with an actor called Ashley Thomas. And it was the end of that short is like him yelling in like full kind of Shakespearean regalia, and it felt really cathartic. And I remember when Ty Golden, who plays young Femi, when the way I worked with the kids, the 11-year-olds, we had a script, but I didn't really use the script with the kids. It was very much conversations with the kids about the character and building scenarios with them. And so I gave a lot of space for them to invent and to do things that went on the page. And Ty really was such an open, flexible young actor, but he was talking to him, even though he was like 11, 12, was like talking to an adult. So it was really interesting way to, it was just fun working with him. And that scream came from an organic place when we were working that scene. And, you know, because I don't think I had that in the script as I remember. And so it was just interesting when, again, taking that sort of improvisational, playful technique with Sam, who is Yoruba like me. And it's important to know actually that when we went to Nigeria, that was also Sam's first time going back, like it was Femi's first time going back. So
Wow.
he really was experiencing all of Lagos, like what he had always wanted to go back, but it just hadn't happened. So and I only found that out halfway through shooting. So I thought that was such a special thing because all of the looks in his eyes when he's experiencing Lagos, looking out and taking the environment, he really is, because it's the first time he's ever been there. And by the time we got to the beach, he was so emotional just from the experience. You can see I was emotional because I'd always wanted to go back home and film. And so to end this journey there was such a personal accomplishment for me, and for him to be there was such a personal accomplishment for him. And I think, again, in the beach, we were improvising and I just let him do what he wanted to do. And he found that yell. And again, it just had this kind of cathartic energy that was really a great release for the character and the character's journey. But I also think was personally coming from Sam himself as well.
Oh, that's amazing. You can really see it on his face and on his just the emotion. That's incredible. Um, it also makes me feel not so bad. I'm Ethiopian and I've never been to Ethiopia. And
Oh, Ethiopian. You know, I could have guessed that. If you had asked me, I think that would have happened. I think it was
oh, sure.
Ethiopian or Eritrean. I would have got that. I would have
No,
got.
you're right. You're right. No, it's a good guess. And actually, there's other famous people I've talked to before, like The Weeknd. He's never been to Ethiopia, and I feel
Yeah,
like it's such a thing. It's such an important, dramatic life moment. But
it
that's
is. I was just so happy that the film could be the context that enabled Sam to get back. So I thought that was amazing.
and capture it. It's beautiful. Okay, so here's a question from Sarah Whitman. Was the choice of the foster mother being white a specific choice? It initially set up a good white mother figure versus a bad black mother. Femi comes to see that his mother is not good bad, but I'm interested in your thoughts regarding race in the movie and in that choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I should provide the context that in the UK, this interracial foster caring thing was happening systematically in the UK. Nigerians and other people from the diaspora, first generation immigrants, would come to the UK, give their kids over to white foster parents. They would specifically be white because they're coming to the UK. And they would essentially raise the kids for a period. Kids would acclimatize to the country, and then foster parents would take the kids back. This was a process that happened on an unprecedented scale. I still don't think we have the full numbers from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and probably onwards. So yes, it was very specific that it was a white foster parent because that's the actual practice that was happening in the UK. And in terms of the racial depictions, I think the last tree is a delicate dance of subtle subversion. So I think, yes, at the start, what you're dealing with is, this is Femi's understanding of home in Lincolnshire in this space. And so you remove a child from that environment to another environment that they don't quite understand, it's always going to seem alien and confrontational. And Yinka is coming from an environment where smacking a child, punishing a child isn't crazy. It's in fact, it's quite funny the way the film breaks down to say white and non-white viewers. I think some white people take the home training as quite super abusive, and Nigerians are like, huh. Yeah, the Africans are like, yeah, this is standard. This is
Yes.
what it was. That's just authentic. It's just the truth of it, of the experience. And what it is important to note, though, is that Femi is a child. He can't quite fully grasp that first generation immigrant story. So the hardships or the situations that his mom came through to try and provide a life for him that she saw would benefit him. And it's only as he grows in the film, as he grows up and he gains a better understanding of that, of her journey, and she takes him back to the motherland, that he really can appreciate her and her perspective. And I think I wouldn't put it in binary good bad characters. I just say that the characters have lived experiences, and we get to participate in the widening of our perspective on them. And I think Femi also rightly admonishes his foster parent for lying to him later on and saying that he could stay when it was very clear that he couldn't. And and she had messed up there because that was very unprofessional in the foster care profession. So I think it has these 360 characters, and it understands, I think the film understands people's perceptions of race, but it also finds subtle ways to kind of subvert and to give you a different perspective on it.
Yeah, that's so interesting about the different cultural thing, because she is nice, but she's also so indulgent, giving him candy and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and, and his mom giving
African parents would be like, "What the hell is this?"
exactly. You're gonna show love by being strict. Yes. Let's see. Here's a question from Charles. How was your film received at Sundance, and were you pleased with the response?
Yes, it was really a really positive response at Sundance. We opened the World Fiction Competition, and we had about 6 screenings at Sundance. And I remember I did every Q&A. I went to every screening, from not just in Park City, but in Salt Lake and I think it was Mountain Resort. And it was just very surreal experience because I went there with my producers and my DP and some of the actors. And I think we just felt a lot of warmth and love towards the film. And it was our world premiere, so it was the first screening. And so it was a world away from the locations in the film and the environment. So it was great to see that those universal themes really were translating.
That's great. So here's a question from Mara Naylor. At the beginning of the movie, around the 7:40 mark, when Femi is standing and staring at the field afar, he turns to look at his mom and she waves at him. Can you give us more insight and talk about the significance of that scene?
Yeah, firstly, I love that she had a 740 what? She had those accent.
Homework, Mara Naylor.
I love that. Like the very second, it's very precise. Yeah, I think they're in the fields of Lincolnshire there, and the mother's trying to make a connection to him. And I think at that stage, Femi is still very distant and not able to engage with her in an emotional or motherly way. And so that's a moment to reflect that. And they're at quite a distance in the framing of that scene. It's really to show that there is actually a real distance, not just between them physically, but emotionally.
Great. Okay, so here's another question from Dorcas Kiptu. Was so glad and happy to, it's just a comment that someone was so glad to see the traditional religion shown in the movie. So that's great. And I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it earlier.
That's great.
Yeah, and here's another question. Can you discuss the white foster mother, the white savior? When I saw that she had other Black male foster kids, my opinion of her changed. Did she only have Black boys, not girls? there's a question if it's a statement about white women, but I think it's more about as you were just talking about, the foster care system. Did you want to talk about the fact that she has only Black boys, or
Yeah,
is, yeah?
that's so the foster mother, again, that's part of the UK foster care system at the time, and this process that they referred to as farming. So unofficially, I guess.
Farming. They refuse
Yeah,
farming.
it was. Yeah, yeah. It was. It was again. It was a phenomenon that hasn't been spoken about much until recently, and it really was Black kids with white foster parents, and the white foster parents sometimes would have multiple kids at one time, and every time that kid would go, they'd get a new kid. So, and they'd be paid for this. So it was like employment in a way. So there's a world of stories with white foster mothers, fathers, and Black African kids. And I think The Last Tree is just one of the one of the first ones to actually unlock part of that story. So the optics may look strange for that reason, and it was strange. And I think there's not a lot of overt conversations about this process and what it was and why it was. But it plays into a lot of deeper things, colonialism, all this sort of stuff that you would have to unpack when exploring the entirety of the system.
Wow. So to follow up with that, there's a question of that she was paid, the foster mother was paid, and someone wants to know if she was paid, did Femi's mom pay, or was it the British Social Services? And I'm assuming it's the British Social Services
Yeah,
that paid
yes,
the foster mother?
you had two types of fostering, authorized and unauthorized. So you could be soft foster, but it could also be the parents paying private.
Oh, very interesting question. Okay, here's the question. Here's from Deborah Strub would like to know, you've been waiting for this, Shola, why is the movie called The Last Tree?
Fair question. Deborah, it's really in reference to the concept of the family tree and having roots and knowing your lineage, which Femi doesn't have at the start, but develops an understanding of during the film, and obviously eventually lands in Lagos and is reconnected to his heritage and lineage.
Great. And then here's a question. It's kind of big, but maybe it's a good time to let's make it even bigger. It's a question from Amy Bertram. She says, I would love to hear Shola's view on how the current worldwide momentum for Black Lives Matter can help get more funding and opportunities for Black filmmakers to get stories out, such as yours. Do you feel optimistic in the current moment of?
It is a good question. And I think you almost got to break it down. I can talk about it from a UK perspective.
Please.
I think in the UK, in terms of our racial dichotomy and our kind of racial breakthroughs as a country, I think we're not quite as progressed in the US in terms of how overt our conversations about race are. And I think this situation, the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent protests, really has brought confrontational conversations to the door. And I think we are now really engaged in that. So I am hopeful that the covert nature of these conversations and how confrontational not the covert, sorry, the overt nature of these conversations and how confrontational they are will really, kick everything into gear in a way that it's needed to be kicked into gear for quite some time. So I know institutions are having a moment of reimagining and rethinking in terms of their racial progress and policies in the UK. And I hope that it's more than a moment because I think we've had a few moments previously and they've kind of come and gone with limited progress. I'd like to think that this is actually a sustained movement now and will provide people of color the opportunities that they really should have already had. So I'm trying to be optimistic about it. Organically, I'm a pessimist, but it's also good to have a touch of optimism, particularly, you know, when you're in the intersection of this kind of racial upheaval and dangerous pandemic. So yeah, I'm trying to be optimistic and say, yeah, I think that at least we're being confrontational about it and we're not doing it the covert way that we've done it before in the UK. It's overt confrontation, and it's much needed confrontation. So I hope that that things will change. And you know, there are some great organizations that are out there like the BFI who are taking the lead and trying to make sure that more voices are heard.
I think actually next week they're launching a new program about the history of Black British film. I'm forgetting what the name of it is right now.
Yes, it's they're playing The Last Tree and another one of my films in that. Yeah, I forgot what it's called, but they're doing that.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can find the name, but yeah, look out for BFI on social. And if you're not in it, if you're there, you can obviously tune in if you're in the UK or in Europe. I'm not sure if you'll be able to watch them from the US, but it looks like a really great campaign, and it's about the history. It's interesting related to this film because it's been pointed out to me that a lot of the history, well, first of the history of Black British film has been more about the Caribbean, more so, even though there's like huge African populations, African immigrant populations, do you feel like that there's new territory in Black British film that just sort of hasn't been covered on film yet?
Like all of it. I think it
Yeah.
was. I honestly think we're actually, as a cultural output, still in its infancy. So I think there's a lot of space. And for me, I always, in reference to The Last Tree, I think Blackness in the UK has been quite the pictures of it have been quite restricted. And I think with each project I've made, it's been about opening up those restrictions and showing a wider breadth and range in what that experience is. So I'm hoping The Last Tree can act as a kind of catalyst for others to tell the much needed various long delayed Black British stories that they want to tell.
Yeah, I hope so. And it was one of my colleagues just let me know that the series that starts next week is called Who We Are.
Yeah,
And I'm really looking forward. I think it's you know, though it's the same thing here. There's so much of our history that just disappears, and like, you know, it's just not gotten a lot of distribution. um Black film, and it's sad because when you read about things in like the 60s and 70s, and it's like they get far to a point, you read about like Bill Gunn's books and like what he's able to make, and then what stops it, like, you know, the things he wants to really make the true expression of who he is, he gets stopped because people want to see a sort of like, they want to see him reckon with who they think he is first, you know, like with the,
I think
you
that's
know.
I think that's really real. I remember a curator friend of mine showed me. I think it's Kathleen Collins' Losing Ground, which is
Yes.
an amazing film from the 80s. I think unfortunately she died maybe before it was released, or I think her daughter helped restore the film and got it out into the world. And I was just like,
Yeah.
wow, you know, what a amazing achievement that film was. And, you know, it's obviously not as widely recognized as I would like, but you think about all the kind of hidden gems that kind of, that should have got more love or should have been pushed further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that film in particular, like I only saw it a few months ago. I mean, a few years ago. because it was made in the 80s and then
Yeah.
she died quite young, but it
Yeah.
never got a proper release until like 2015 or
Yes.
that.
Yeah. It didn't. Her
Yeah.
daughter picked up the baton and made sure it had the release.
It's crazy. And when I finally saw it, it was like, oh, this is like 8.5 for Black women. It's about like,
Yeah.
a creative person. And I couldn't believe.
It's such a clever. It has one of the funniest lines I remember. I think it's in the library scene with the dude with the cape. It's just an amazing film, and she should have got so much more from it.
And then that happens with like Julie Dash too, who made like her first film and then hasn't really made much beyond those first films.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, yeah. There's a strong lineage there. I mean, and Daughters is an incredible film as well. So yeah,
yeah.
between Losing Ground and Daughters of the Dust, there's such, and I feel like they should be put on like tour again or something as a double bill.
Yeah, we've played them at Indie Memphis and we yeah, they're absolute favorites, canon. But yeah, I feel like that the films like that get made and then for some reason there's like a hurdle of getting more of those films made. And maybe you're right, maybe that now those conversations that we're all having like, with each other are being more overt and more like more there's I hope that people see there's more of a pressing need to get past these hurdles and get,
Yeah,
all of,
absolutely.
um, are there any more questions? This is your last chance. I think we'll wrap up, but I wanted to ask you, you talked a little bit about Sam, who plays Femi, the older Femi, and he recently got an award. What was it? The Face of Tomorrow or something? What?
So he got a couple awards. He got Star of Tomorrow from
Yeah.
Screen Daily in it was like last summer, and then he won the British Film Independent Film Award for Best Newcomer last
Oh.
year. So yeah, he's Sam is I feel like we're going to see a lot more of him.
I think so too. I think so. I think I conflated those two awards, but
Mhm.
yes, and he's so good in your film. And thank you so much for joining us and for talking. It was such a pleasure to talk to you about it. And thanks for making and sharing this beautiful film.
Oh, good. The pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Oh, good. All right. And we'll be do this again next week. Please tune in again. And thank you again, Shola. And thank you very much, Tiara, for bringing this beautiful film to the States. And bye, everyone.
Bye.